Hi everyone, welcome to Moon to Central Science Labs. I'm Marcus.
And I'm Betty.
And we're your
Lab
techs. Hi guys, so today we're going to be looking at the brain, which is a very important organ of our body. The brain is actually involved in almost everything we do in life, to do with our movement, our heart, our breathing, our thoughts, our emotions, our personalities, things that motivate us, things that don't motivate us. So yeah, it's a very, very important organ to look at. So that's going to be the topic of our video today. So the purpose of our experiment today, or our dissection today, is to try to look at a real set of brains, to cut it in half, to be able to look at the different parts and identify the parts, and to get an idea of what those parts might actually do for the animal. And compare and contrast it to a human brain, how they might be different, how a sheep and a human is different. So what equipment are we going to need for today's experiment? Obviously, to start off with, we'll have our safety gear, our lab coat to keep dissecting materials off our clothes, safety glasses to keep things from getting into our eyes, and some gloves. Now, the gloves are very important with brain tissue especially, because things like mad cow's disease can actually come from brain tissue. Not that it's very likely, but it is actually important to protect your skin and cuts from getting the brain fluid on you. Other than that, we're going to need some forceps, some dissecting scissors, and a sharp scalpel to do our dissection, because the tissue is quite soft and mushy, so you need a very sharp scalpel to cut it cleanly. And of course, we're going to need a dissecting board. So if we look down here, we've got a dissecting board. And we're going to need, obviously, a set of sheep's brains, which are quite hard to get a good one, but we'll do what we can with this one today. Okay, so we're going to look at the sheep's brain to start off with and have a bit of an overview of the outside structures, if you like. Now, you've got to remember this sheep's brain's been flattened out a bit because it's quite mushy, so it's sitting on a board and it's actually flattened out. Normally, it'd be quite a lot more spherical. So if we look down at the brain itself, and we'll have a bit of a look at the different parts. Now, to start off with, this is if I turn it around this way, the back of the brain is facing towards you and the front of the brain is facing towards me. Now, the part sticking out of the back of the brain here is the spinal column, which goes into the rest of the body, obviously, to carry the brain's messages to the body. After that, you have the cerebellum. Now, the cerebellum is involved in movement and coordination, and that's at the back of the brain there. Now, the spinal cord then goes into the medulla, and the medulla is to do with the bodily function, your normal bodily functions such as breathing, respiration, heart rate, blood pressure. And then you go into the cerebrum, which is the main part of the brain, the front part of the brain here, which is divided up into two hemispheres. You might see a line down the middle here. So you have your left and your right hemisphere. Now, obviously, you're going by the animal's left and right, so that would be the animal's left, and that would be the animal's right. And so they're the two hemispheres. And the two hemispheres do similar things, and they communicate to each other through some structures we'll have a look at later. Now, the frontal lobes of the sheep's brain are actually a lot smaller than in a human brain, and we'll talk about why that is as well. Now, on this brain, it's a little bit dried out now, but you can actually see little lines in the brain. And in fact, if you look at a model of a brain, I don't know if you can see that there. The model of a brain, you'll see that there's lots of ridges and lines in the brain itself. The ridges are called the gyri, or one is called a gyrus, and the grooves between them are the sulci. Just so you've got some names for that, so when we talk about that later, you'll understand that as well. Okay, so the largest part of the brain, the cerebrum, is actually what you see mostly when you take a brain out of an animal or out of a human being. And it has different functions. It's actually the centre of most of our conscious actions and thoughts. So if we look down at the cerebrum, we'll go through some of the main sections of that cerebrum here. So towards the back of the cerebrum, we're actually involved in sensory part of the brain, so involved in your senses and how you experience the world. The next sort of band in here would be the motor part of your brain, so conscious movements that you're making. After that, you get into the logical part of your brain where you start making decisions and thinking. And after that, you get into the more social part of your brain. And underneath, if we look very, very careful, and the logical part of your brain is actually the very front. So in a sheep, it's not that big because sheep don't actually use a lot of logic in their day-to-day lives. And underneath, although it might not be here in this one because it might have been removed, but your olfactory bulb is actually on the bottom of your frontal lobe there, which is involved in your sense of smell. So to do our brain dissection of the sheep's brain, we're going to make a longitudinal cut straight down the middle of the brain between the two hemispheres to try expose some of the structures. Now, sadly, in this particular sheep's brain, if we zoom down on the sheep's brain now, when it was removed, the medulla was actually broken, so we're going to have to sort of do our best to show those structures. So what we're going to do, we're going to basically slice down the middle of the brain as carefully as we can. And we're going to try cut down the middle of the medulla, which is quite messed up. It's going to be rather difficult, quite mushy. And what we also want to do is to cut down the centre of the cerebellum as well. So we're just going to very carefully slice that as carefully as we can to try and get some of the structures showing. Very difficult because, I say, the brains from the butchers tend to be very, very mushy. Okay, so looking at the sheep's brain from the bottom now, so you're looking at from the bottom up. You have the spinal column out the back here, which is the connecting cord to the rest of the body so the brain can control the rest of the body with its messages. You have the medulla that's next, which is the parts involved in bodily function, automatic bodily functions such as blood pressure, heart rate, that sort of thing. You have the cerebellum coming off that with the arbor vitae coming up the middle here with little branches coming off so that the cerebellum can communicate with the rest of the body as well. And that's involved in coordination of movement. You then have the pons, which is just simply a connecting region that connects the medulla to the rest of the brain. Then you go into the thalamus region, the thalamus and the hypothalamus, which is involved in body regulation as well. The pineal gland is somewhere up here, although in this particular one it's not particularly well, you can't really see it all that much, but the pineal gland is involved in things like diurnal rhythms, sleep regulation, when you feel tired, when you want to wake up. So then we go into the front part of the brain, into the cerebrum and the one of the cortexes, and down the middle here you have the corpus callosum, which is the connecting area between the two hemispheres of the brain. So that the right and the left brain can coordinate and communicate with each other. We have cut this brain straight down the middle of the two hemispheres, so that's why we've cut through the corpus callosum. You have so it's also considered white matter, of course, and the rest of the brain is full of the brain cells, which is considered the grey matter. Now the frontal lobe here on the sheep's brain is quite small, and that's involved in things like conscious behaviour, social interactions, logic, and that sort of thing. So obviously you'd expect it in a sheep's brain to be smaller. And the olfactory bulb, which is usually under here, which may be part of it still there, is involved in your sense of smell. So what have we learnt today? We've learnt that the brain is a very complex organ of our body that controls our body in so many different ways, and that the different parts have lots and lots of different very complex functions. Okay, so in our dissection, we actually cut the brain longitudinally down the centre line of the brain to show the structures inside the brain. So we took apart the left and the right side of the brain to reveal the structures that are inside. So we zoom in on the structures here, we'll go through them again. At the bottom we have the spinal column coming into the brain, which is the main connecting nerve or axon that goes, or set of axons that go to the body to transfer the messages from the brain to the body. From the spinal column we go into the medulla, which is the brain stem. The brain stem controls all our automatic regulation of things like heart rate, respiration, blood pressure, that sort of thing. On the side of the medulla here we have the cerebellum. The cerebellum is involved in coordination and movement of the body, and the little structure which we try to show in our dissection, which is the arbor vitae, are all the little axons going into the brain cells of the cerebellum. Then we go from the brain stem here, we go through the pons, which is an area just of connecting axons which help to connect the brain stem to other parts of the brain. Now from there we have the thalamus and the hypothalamus through this region here, and the thalamus and the hypothalamus is involved in body regulation and relay between sensory nerves. Up in this tiny little centre section is the pineal gland. Now the pineal gland is actually quite important. It's not fully understood, but it is involved in regulating sleep patterns and diurnal rhythms, in other words, the rhythms between day and night. We have the corpus callosum above here. Now the corpus callosum is an important part of the brain that we actually cut in half in our dissection because it connects the right and the left parts of the brain and helps to coordinate the right and the left parts of the brain. And other than that, we have obviously the grey matter through here, and the things like the corpus callosum, and anywhere you see bunches of nerve cell axons of the nerve cells, or the long part of the brain cells that are covered with a protein called myelin, or a myelin sheath, they are white and they're called the white matter. So hopefully you've learnt a bit about the brain today, and you can see the brain in a whole new light. Alright guys, that's it from Mernda Central Science Labs for now. Bye from me, Marcus.
And bye from me, Betty.